Anyway, the next thing I know, I'm marching on the Capitol because we up there to protest a bill they're trying to put in to keep us from carrying guns.
Black History Month is a great opportunity for us to come together and discuss the rich history that African Americans have here in this great nation. Unfortunately, one of the things that's seldom discussed during this time of year is the role that the Second Amendment has played in helping African Americans, in fact all Americans, secure their rights and liberties. From the Civil War through civil rights, even through until today, the Second Amendment has played an integral role in helping African Americans secure their rights. Dating all the way back to slavery, laws were put in place in order to keep slaves and freed black men from obtaining firearms. And that practice continued after the Civil War as many states passed what's known as black codes, specifically designed to keep African American men from exercising their right to keep and bear arms. It was the passage of these laws and the proliferation of violent acts against African Americans that spurred the creation of one of the most unlikely civil rights groups of its time, the NRA.
I want to talk a little bit about the NRA and the beginning of the NRA. And I don't know why the NRA is not using this, but how was the NRA founded? Because it's a white racist organization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you got to go back a little bit, because what happened prior to the Civil War was in the southern states, a black cannot have an arm in self-defense of anything, anyway. Of course, he might use it like they did Nat Turner to kill a white guy, and then we can't have that. So what you have is blacks have no self-defense rights. Then you have the 13th Amendment that says all blacks are free in the South everywhere, not just the Emancipation Proclamation in the South.
Can they own a gun?
They could, but what happened was, being free, instantly in the South they started passing what were called the black codes. They had about 11 laws. One of the laws is blacks cannot own guns, they cannot own knives, they cannot own any weapon. They're free, they're citizens. Well, they can't own anything to defend themselves. Then in 1866 you have the Klan that gets started. And the Klan is after driving out all the free blacks and all the Republican whites that freed them. And so at that time you have in total about 5,000 lynchings. About 75% were of blacks, 25% were of whites.
Right.
So Klan is after anybody that's sure. For black rights. So at that point, the southern states are not doing anything to inhibit the Klan. Often it is the government themselves that is part of the Klan that is going after the blacks. And so NRA rises up in 1871 with 3 Union officers who had fought to end slavery, fought for civil rights for blacks. 2 of them are Union generals, and they start the NRA. And part of the reason is they want blacks to be able to defend themselves individually, use their individual right of self-defense against the Klan, because the government's doing nothing to stop the Klan.
In fact, the civil rights movement is full of examples of black men using their Second Amendment rights to defend other rights for all people. For example, in 1964, the desegregation of Jonesboro, Louisiana High School was threatened when an angry mob showed up, complete with support from law enforcement and fire hoses. But then 4 black men showed up with shotguns, and without firing a shot, the crowd eventually backed down and law enforcement moved aside in order to allow the students to pass. These 4 men were members of an organization known as the Deacons for Defense. They were everyday citizens who got together and organized in order to defend themselves and their community against the tyranny and violence of the Ku Klux Klan.
I want to thank the Lord for our Constitution. I also want to thank the NRA for its legacy. The National Rifle Association was founded by religious leaders who wanted to protect free slaves from the Ku Klux Klan. They would raise money, buy arms, show the free slaves how to use those arms, and protect their families.
The Second Amendment to the Constitution spells out the right of people under this particular governmental system to have arms to defend themselves.
Needless to say, some folks weren't very happy about that. And thus was born the gun control movement. But make no mistake, this wasn't about protecting people or reducing violence. It was about making sure that those people didn't get guns.
There's been a lot of talk said recently because I was supposed to have said something about Negroes should buy rifles. White people have been buying rifles all their lives. No commotion.
The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense calls upon the American people in general and the black people in particular to take full note of the racist California legislature, which is now considering legislation aimed at keeping the black people disarmed and powerless.
For black Americans, we know that gun control has ultimately been about people control. It sprouts from racist soil, be it after or during the infamous Dred Scott case, where black man's humanity was not recognized. And the beauty about some racists is that sometimes they're blatantly honest. And the racist Chief Justice Taney said, we cannot allow the law to recognize the humanity of this individual because he would be able to keep and bear arms.
And where did they get their inspiration? None other than the master himself, Adolf Hitler. That's right, they actually went to the codes that Nazi Germany used to keep guns out of the hands of undesirable people. And in some cases, they went as far as to copy the language word for word. Although you may not know it by watching the mainstream media, there are many black leaders who recognize the gun control movement for exactly what it is, an attempt to disarm law-abiding citizens.
It ain't society. It's a few people at the top trying to de-arm, urban communities. That's what it is.
I believe Dr. King would look at me with a bit of confusion as he happily struggled with envy that I, a young black male living in the heart of the South, whose house was never firebombed and has never received death threats, was granted a concealed handgun license. Yet he, who had encountered all of these things, was denied. Because let's not forget, the first forms of gun control were created to keep people like me from having guns.
I happen to support freedom. And I think the Second Amendment is about freedom. All right? It isn't about hunting. It isn't really about personal defense. There's some parallels, but it's about freedom. It's about law-abiding people being free to make decisions in their lives. That's what the Founding Fathers wanted. That's why they created that Bill of Rights. Freedom from government intrusion.
It's almost impossible to fully capture the impact the Second Amendment has had on black history in this one short video. So please, take the time to follow the links and watch some of the videos that are connected to this video. Educate yourself and educate others as to the role the Second Amendment has played in black history. That way, we all will know that the Second Amendment is important not just because it's a civil right, but because it's the one that defends all others. I'm Craig DeLuz with the Firearms Policy Coalition. Thank you for watching.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.